I've had the Z Fold 5 for 40 days now, and it's far surpassed the hype that I initially had. Whether it's the practicality of having a large display in your pocket at all times, or a top-of-the-line interest-piquing smartphone that makes you excited every time you pick it up, despite how much I used the Z Fold 5, the honeymoon period just hasn't even begun to come to an end. At $1,800, this phone could be a tough sell to a lot of people, which is understandable, and that being said, there's a ton of high-end flagships on the market that are pushing their way up to that hefty price tag. And when it comes to the Z Fold 5 and what it has to offer versus the competition, it's clear that there's a genuine benefit to this form factor and this device specifically. Before we get into it though, a like and a sub to the channel is always appreciated. It really does mean a lot when you all show your support, and we're very close to hitting 25,000 subscribers, so thank you so much. Anyways, the last 40 days with this phone have been nothing but enjoyable. It's rare that I use my phone to replace other devices around the house, but when it comes to the Fold 5, it's genuinely just become everything for me. Anything from gaming on the go, scrolling through socials, watching YouTube, it's just been amazing to have all of this accessible, not only on such a large display, but a beautiful one at that. Having spent more time with the Z Fold 5 though, it's clear to me that this wasn't just a minuscule upgrade to the Z Fold 4. The differences between the two, while small individually, all make a really big impact to the user experience. Like the upgrade from a 1000 nit panel on the inside all the way up to 1750 nits of peak brightness. Outdoor viewing is not only now possible, but very, very good. And despite having some pretty hot and sunny days during my testing of the Fold 5, it handled it all quite well and took a considerable amount of time before the display decided to dim. And although I do tend to use the outer display more so when I'm outside, due to this very comfortable one-handed form factor, it's nice knowing that I can have great viewing experiences with that inner display in direct sunlight. But when indoors, that foldable dynamic AMOLED screen is crazy good. I use the vivid picture profile as I'm just a huge fan of colors and the saturation it provides on OLED displays, but at a PPI of 373 with a 91% screen to body ratio, it absolutely blows my mind every time I use it. And all of that is despite the fact that there's a selfie camera tucked away under the display. But due to how tight the pixel grid is that's covering it, even though it is there, it's pretty much impossible to see. I think the biggest critique that I can give the Z Fold 5 about its display though has got to be the form factor. Having used previous iterations of the Fold though, I am used to it, and believe it or not, I do actually prefer this style of phone. Though I can see why some people might want a wider display, something more akin to the Pixel Fold, as standard 16:9 videos will fill up that screen more. Also, due to the screen being a 4:3 aspect ratio in portrait, it also does make a really big impact on that cover display. I have actually made a full video covering all of my opinions on the biggest problem with the Fold 5, so I will link that video in the description if you want to check it out later. That being said, when it does come to the outer display, the Fold 5 for me isn't a problem. It's very easy to navigate, and only after a couple of days, I found myself becoming very comfortable with typing on this phone. A lot of people tend to think that because the Fold 5 is thick, and it has a very narrow aspect ratio, it makes the cover display a complete write-off. However, I completely disagree. In fact, I actually think it's one of the more underrated features of this whole lineup. It's still a very high resolution and sharp display, and it shares the same 1750 nit peak brightness of the inner display. Although I do tend to use it as my go-to display when I am outside of the house, I still find myself using that inner display a whole lot more just because it gives you a lot more benefits. And in my opinion, it makes way more sense considering I use the inner display more, because that's kind of the whole point of rocking one of these foldables and paying that luxurious price tag. One thing that I did want to touch on though is the gap in the phone. Or actually with the Fold 5, the lack thereof. I talked about the potential of this being a great thing for the Z Fold 5 in previous videos, as I thought that it would help lint and debris from getting inside the display, and after spending much more time with the Z Fold 5, I'm honestly happy to say that I was correct. I talked about the Z Fold 4 in a previous review and mentioned how the inner display, it just collects lint, and every time you pull it out of your pocket, you're pretty much gonna need to wipe it up. And with this phone, due to the new hinge and how it folds in on itself completely, this is not really a concern anymore. And I know that sounds silly, like, who cares? You have to wipe your screen? Like, really? But doing this every time you take the phone out of your pocket and unfold it is just a very annoying habit, especially for long-term ownership. Now, I could do a deep dive with the Fold 5 and go into all the nitty-gritty when it comes to the specs and the performance of this phone, but chances are, if you're watching this video, you've already seen much larger creators do that who are just more skilled at giving you that kind of information. So rather than storage size and camera specs, I wanted to show you some footage taken from the Fold 5 and some images from all the cameras so you can get an idea of what real world use looks like when it comes to these shooters. You can see the images are quite pleasing, and overall I'm really happy with the photos that come out of the Fold 5, especially that 3x telephoto lens. They're sharp, they have nice color, and while maybe not the most technically accurate images, they're very shareable. Sophia. They're very shareable directly out of the camera. When it comes to the video though, I think the phone handles it great. Like 4K 30 looks amazing and it's very smooth to shoot in. All the lenses handle stabilization very nicely, and I don't have a problem using this phone to capture any meaningful moments. I've actually used this camera on my phone to shoot a couple videos with the top-down rig that I have just to see how well it actually handled it in terms of content creation, and it looks pretty good. 8K 30 does seem to be a little sharper, but almost unflattering in my opinion. You can tell that there's a lot done when it comes to the processing, and I'm personally just not exactly a fan of that kind of look. I would stick with 4K 30 as not only the file sizes are much smaller and it's easier to work with, but I do think it looks nicer myself. Overall, despite the cameras being pretty lackluster on paper, I think the Fold 5 provides a very balanced set of shooters. I would have liked to see a 10x zoom, but at this point in time, I don't think that it's quite possible with the limited space Samsung is working with inside. The only real complaint with the cameras that I do have has got to be that inner display selfie camera. It's just mediocre. For images and for video, the inner display selfie camera just isn't really the best option, nor is it my go-to. If I do want to take a selfie with the phone, I do often end up using flex mode, which I find to take better images considering I'm using the actual rear main shooters on the camera. But I wouldn't go out of my way to use this for any sort of real pictures that I'd like to post, or for any videos that I want to shoot for the channel or for social media, as I just feel like in low light and with any light in general, it looks really soft and it comes out quite grainy due to it being hidden behind the display. Moving on from the cameras though, I do actually want to touch a little bit on the durability of the Fold 5, as I have been intentionally rocking this phone caseless. I've had a few instances where I've dropped my phone from my hip onto straight concrete, and after inspecting the device, all seems to be good. There's minor scuffs as expected with hard falls, but it's something kind of akin to what you'd see on the stainless steel frame of the 14 Pro, which is interesting despite the fact that this phone is actually aluminum and it is a lot softer, but that's a good thing. I do have one dent though, which is barely noticeable. However, that actually wasn't my fault, that was my brother's, so just let me slide on that one, okay? That being said, the scuffs around the frame aside, it's held up surprisingly well. Way better than I expected from a foldable. And the inner display works fine, the hinge is in immaculate condition, and it functions like it did the day that I got it. Surprisingly, the rear glass has held up despite falling onto it several times. And I know I sound careless when I talk about this phone and how many times I've dropped it and not using a case, but I genuinely did, just for this channel and my own curiosity, want to see what dropping it on concrete and, throwing it around in your day-to-day is going to do to a phone like this, especially long term. I'm the kind of person that is terrified of using my phone without a case, so this has been kind of a very cringy experience for me, but it's also just made me feel better about dropping the phone now that there are a couple scuffs, so I don't have to baby this thing. So to everyone out there that's saying that this phone is going to break down on you in a week, I've put it through hell and I couldn't really be any happier with how it's held up. When it comes to the battery, I use this phone a lot more than I have with any other, partly because it's still new to me, but also because it's replaced every other device in my household, like my iPad mini. That being said, I'm able to get well beyond a day and a half with the Fold 5. I used to have battery anxiety with Samsung flagships despite having some larger cells. The efficiency just wasn't there, and with this phone only having a 4400 mAh battery, initially I was quite worried. Though Android has come a long way since and also has seen some improvements. We've also seen improvements with Bluetooth, more efficient chips, displays, and so on. and it just makes me happy to know that I don't need to be sitting around an outlet every time I go out. For me, I can get about 7 hours of screen on time no problem, and that's about 80% usage with this inner display. You can push it and get a lot more if you use the light profile, battery saver, disabled, 120 hertz, or you just use the cover display a lot more. But for me, 7 hours of screen on time is plenty. And if you actually do use your phone for 7, 8, 9 hours in a day, I think it's a good time to take a break. But as you can tell, I think it's clear from the sentiment of my videos surrounding the Fold 5 that my experience with the device has been extremely positive, and that's coming from a phone that cost me nearly 3,000 Canadian dollars out of pocket. I've just been so impressed with the Fold 5 and truly do think that Samsung has a really good future when it comes to foldables. Never in my life when I was younger did I think that I'd essentially be able to fold an iPad mini and stuff it into my pocket and take it with me everywhere that I went. And seeing this tech come to life in front of me has just been a mind-blowing experience, and being a techie, that's why I choose to rock something like the Fold, because it's just exciting. Every time I open this phone up and use it, it just puts a big smile on my face, and there's no other phone that does that for me. Anyways, thank you all so much for watching this video. If you have any questions about the Fold 5, don't hesitate to ask me in the comments below. But if you want to watch some more in-depth videos about this device, I'll link my previous videos about this phone down in the description below. Leave a like if you enjoyed, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you all in the next one. Peace out.